Baldur's Gate 3 and Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 are some of the best works that Larian Studios has produced. Not only was the first Original Sin met with success, it also influenced Larian's design choices for the games that came after it. With its traditional RPG mechanics that let you tailor your character, pen and paper inspired playground for you to explore, and a deep and reactive combat system for you to master, Divinity Original Sin had all the design basis that made an amazing RPG experience. With Original Sin 2, Larian took that design basis and further mastered it to the point of perfection. The game was a living, breathing RPG world for you to explore, and one of the best and deeply immersive CRPG experiences. But Larian was not done yet. After convincing Wizards of the Coast to develop a Baldur's game, Larian got the green light. Using their strengths of their RPG design approach and incorporating the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition formula, Baldur's Gate 3 was made, and the praise for that game, well, I'm sure most of you already know. A D&D video game experience brought to life. Indeed, Larian's design approach has allowed the studio to flourish on the modern CRPG scene. But while Original Sin is often credited as the basis for the design of its sequel and Baldur's Gate 3, this was not actually the first time Larian had implemented it. In fact, you can actually trace most of these design aspects to Divine Divinity. The first game in the Divinity franchise, it was an isometric action RPG game that also incorporated CRPG elements. The gameplay was not unlike Diablo, where players would be able to go around the world, delve into dungeons, kill enemies, level up, and find loot to make your character stronger and edgier.
I'm a bad boy.
But unlike Diablo, Divine Divinity also incorporated traditional CRPG elements into its system, with things like branching dialogue conversations, non-combat skills, and a reputation system, just to name a few. The game itself did see notable praise during its release, particularly with how vast the world was and how immersive it could be with letting your character interact with it. Despite some of its fun and player-driven design, it never did take off in the same way that Original Sin did. A sequel game did follow with Beyond Divinity, and while it tried to invigorate the Divine Divinity formula, there were many inconsistencies and issues with some of its core design elements that didn't exactly lend itself well to the game. The series did see a third-person action RPG sequel in Divinity 2, as well as a tactical strategy spin-off with Divinity Dragon Commander. But it was only until Original Sin did the franchise hit its stride. Original Sin 2 would follow suit, as well as Baldur's Gate 3. Even though Divine Divinity did not see the same potential as Original Sin, its successor's core designs owe much of it to Larian's first iteration. So in this video, we'll take a look at what exactly Divine Divinity established to help create Original Sin, and by extension, Baldur's Gate 3. The first thing that should be noted though, is what Divine Divinity actually borrows from some of the RPG games that came before it. The most notable, of course, is Diablo, with its isometric style and recognizable action RPG combat mechanics. Divine Divinity uses a similar combat system, where you get to go out with your character into the isometric world and kill a bunch of enemies with your left mouse button. Although you only have to click once and your character auto-attacks for you, so you at least save some precious microseconds before carpal tunnel kicks in. You also get to assign a skill to your right click for a spell or ability, chug health and mana potions, equip your character from head to toe with loot drops, slot, or in Divine's case, charm your equipment, repair your equipment, and get mad at the fact that your character has stamina sprinting. Indeed, this very much feels like a Diablo clone, and Divine Divinity does try to emulate it in this manner, while still trying to hold on to some of its intended CRPG design. Outside of the combat gameplay, traditional RPG elements are the other defining feature of Divine Divinity. You have stat allocation that governs how your character performs in combat, branching dialogue choices that affect how your character interacts with the world, various skills like lockpicking, bartering, and pickpocketing that let you have non-combative interactions, and even a reputation system that shows how everyone views you.
Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself.
Just on these elements alone give the game more uniqueness rather than just being a Diablo clone. Your ability to have player agency, along with being able to customize your character to your preference, makes the RPG experience much more unique to you. It tries to hit that middle ground between being an action RPG game while also trying to be a computer RPG game. But of course, there are more layers to the Divine formula than the elements that it borrowed from, as we now move on to what unique designs were added to make the game a little more divine. A divinity, that is. And some of these will be important to Larian's later games. The most unique design element that stands out is the open-world sandbox-like map of Ferrol. Sure, if you were to look at the area alone, its size is not that different from other CRPG games, and some of it might actually be bigger. Not to mention even Morrowind did the open-world design as well, the same year in fact. But what makes it stand out the most is what you get to do in it. Going through each of Rivertown's many locations will lead you to a large number of interactions, from the friendly to the not-so-friendly ones. You'll be talking to many different people, learning about local news and gossip, finding quests from a variety of different individuals, or just seeing the various locals complain about each other.
Are you blind, dwarf? Didn't you see me coming?
Me eyes is just fine, human. It's your ears that need healing.
It's the sheer amount of world building that Larian tries to stuff the map with that makes it feel alive. Not to mention the amount of freedom the player gets to have when it comes to exploring the setting at their own pace. By extension, you also get a seriously large number of quests to do. Most of them are pretty simple since they usually involve either finding something or someone, retrieving that something, or killing that someone, but nothing too complicated, unless it's the literal, what does this key do? And you'll have to try it on every single door in the world. Seriously. In any case, Divine Divinity piles on the quests, so there's no shortage of things to do. The game also has the design approach to limiting how much handholding it actually gives you. Outside of some interactive tutorials that you see in the first town, the game more or less has you figure it out on your own accord, whether it's through the questing, interactions, exploring, even your own preferred method of combat. One of the benefits of this design is that it allows the player to find their own means with figuring out solutions to the various situations and quests scattered throughout the world, trying to push the player to a sense of self-learning and discovery that can often be more rewarding than simply doing what must be done. Another unique design is how the player is able to freely move objects around the world, from objects and equipment that you can pick up, as well as some of the heavier looking objects that you can find. This made for some unique world interactions, as the game would let you combine certain objects when you place them together. Moving objects in certain locations would also reveal hidden items or even pathways for the player to utilize. The last design approach is the class and skill system, that is to say, the game actually lacks one. Even though it makes it seem like there is a mage, warrior, and rogue, or in Divinity's case, survivor class, from the start, this is simply each character having a starting set of stats that can put the player in their desired path. When you actually level in-game and get skills, you have the freedom to basically pick and choose whatever you want. You can pick from the warrior, mage, and survivor list with virtually no prerequisites other than levels. It's meant to be an open-ended design that allows for personal builds that don't feel as restrictive as class hybridization in some other systems. So now that we've covered the designs unique to Divine Divinity, how does the former game influence Larian's later games? Well, if you're familiar with the original Sin games and Baldur's Gate 3, you might notice there's a bit of overlap with some of the things I mentioned. The most notable one is the world design. Original Sin and Baldur's overworld is designed to make the player feel like they are in an open-world sandbox level, where they have the freedom to roam around and interact with the many different encounters that the world gives. We see this same design principle from Divine Divinity. While of course there are differences in the later games, changing the map design to suit the 3D environment, as well as the slower pacing and turn-based system, the core concept of letting the player freely explore and interact with the world still remain the same. Coupled with the fact that there are a large number of interactions, quests, and conversations that you can come across, the allowance for player choice and freedom further enhances the sense of role-playing. The lack of handholding is also reinforced in the original Sin games as well as Baldur's Gate 3, with minimal guidance in dictating how the player should explore the world. Compared to Divine Divinity, both original Sin games enhance this aspect by allowing a greater multitude of solutions to various encounters that the players can come across, meaning that solutions are never straightforward, and there's always different options for you to explore. This is also the case in Baldur's Gate 3, but it's sort of to be expected since the design of D&D is meant to promote player agency and creativity rather than being told what to do. Another very noticeable design that carried over was allowing the player to freely move objects around the world. Both original Sin games as well as Baldur's Gate 3 let the player do this in almost the exact same manner, but with the restriction of your character's strength and telekinetic power, whereas Divine Divinity let you yeet objects as far as you want, no matter what. Similar to Divine though, the later games would often require moving objects in order to solve puzzles or look for hidden pathways. The benefit of 3D was also helpful, as it made finding objects and pathways a lot easier when compared to the 2D landscape of Divine Divinity. Not to mention the interactivity between the objects and the environment is significantly better. The skill and progression system was also similarly retained in both original Sin games, though absent in Baldur's for D&D 5th edition reasons. Both original Sin 1 and 2 also let you freely choose spells and abilities to tailor your character however you like, though with a bit more restriction, as you also have to use skill points to unlock specific ability and skill avenues. Original Sin 1 and 2 do have a greater emphasis on path focus when compared to Divine Divinity, as your spells and abilities improve with higher skill progressions. Regardless though, the core concept of letting the player freely choose their skill routes however they wish was retained, even to the same extent after picking your starting class. Outside of Divine Divinity's unique systems and combat, pretty much most of the general RPG mechanics made their way to Original Sin and Baldur's Gate 3, which is quite obvious though since they are RPG games after all. But the attributes, talents, and skills are improved to better fit Original Sin and Baldur's more complex CRPG design. One interesting thing to note though is that the party system of Original Sin was likely influenced by the two-character system in Beyond Divinity, where you get to play two characters simultaneously as a means to utilize a multi-character party system. This would become the four-party system that is present with Larian's later titles. Although not directly carried to the later games, combat was definitely one of the major changes that was implemented. It is generally accepted that the change to turn-based combat, along with the addition of Original Sin's complex spells and abilities, only benefited the other systems, most of which were derived from Divine Divinity. Not only did it better fit the CRPG design, but it also made Original Sin feel more unique as a traditional CRPG game, rather than the ARPG game that Divine tried to go for. Why incorporate an ARPG system at all then? Well, you can thank Diablo for pretty much trending that side of the RPG coin, so I'm not surprised if being a Diablo-like meant trying to appeal to a greater audience, especially back in the early 2000s. Oh, and I would like to add how humor has actually been one of the charming constants throughout the Divinity franchise, and even Baldur's Gate 3 as well.
I mean, if you think about it, we don't have no muscles or flesh on our bones either, so what keeps us together, sort of thing, huh?
Best not to think about it. I don't want to fall to bits because of excess existential thought. Nasty.
Holy Ishmael!
Oh, heavens! Oh, please, Lucian, spare me!
Of course! What fun! I'm going to fucking kill you.
So that's pretty much everything. When you look back at Divine Divinity, there's a number of influences in the design that have carried over to the original Sin games as well as Baldur's Gate 3. While Divine Divinity may not have had the same fully realized concepts as its successors, you can see the basis for what would eventually evolve to become Larian's later games, not to mention their design philosophy moving forward. It's as if they're taking their base concepts and improving upon them each step of the way. Sure, not everything was well implemented, and you can definitely see some road bumps here and there, but when the potential of these designs became fully realized, that's when you get to see the masterpieces for what they really are. It's actually kind of endearing to see how Larian has learned and evolved their design concepts throughout the various iterations of the Divinity franchise. It's also interesting to note that Sven has been the design lead of every single Larian game that has been made today. So arguably much of the design concepts that started with Divine Divinity and carried all the way to Larian's current games are attributed to him. That's not to discredit the other members of Larian though, because none of these games, as well as their design contribution, could not have existed without them. Thank you Larian and thank you Divine Divinity, because without those initial design concepts and approaches, we definitely would not have gotten some of the most amazing RPG experiences in gaming. But that's gonna do it for today guys. Thank you all for sticking around. There will be more games to play and more videos coming soon, so please stay tuned. For now though, I'll see you all next time.